Good afternoon and welcome to the Just Transition series and to today's session on Indigenous leadership in the energy transition, brought to you by Capire Consulting Group. My name is Matthew Gordon and I am a Senior Associate at Capire. For those who don't know, we are Australia's one of Australia's largest specialist community engagement consulting firms. Our purpose is to help our clients understand their communities to create better and positive outcomes. In fact, the word capire is from the Italian word capire, meaning to understand. Capiche? We're a leading voice in engagement practice in Australia, and through our work, we deliver tailored strategies for projects, policies, and LACEs. We have actually quite a long history of working in the energy sector, and we're continuing to work with communities, developers, and governments to support the transition to renewables. In the interest of reconciliation, Capire does acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connection to land, sea, and community. We pay our respects to elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders peoples here today. I am in fact meeting on the lands of the Wurundjeri, and I invite everyone in attendance to jump on chat and let us know where you are meeting from yourself. Pertinent to today's conversation and session, I recognise also that the rights and responsibilities that ultimately sit with traditional owners as a function of their self-determination. And while our panel brings a variety of lived and professional experiences, our panel are not here to speak on behalf of traditional owner groups, which is a voice missing in this conversation. The Just Transition series brings together a wide range of industry leaders, local governments, practitioners, and community advocates to share practical insights and strengthen collaboration and support better engagement practice that delivers improved community outcomes. Today is our fourth of 6 sessions, and in my view, one of the most interesting. Tomorrow, we will have a session on powering the land, looking at the compatibility of agricultural and energy land uses. And then tomorrow afternoon, we'll be wrapping up all of the insights and conversations that we've had across the week and having a conversation around what engagement for success looks like and how do we put communities at the centre of the just transition. This session will be led by Capire's co-founder Amy Hubbard and practice lead. So look forward to that session on Thursday afternoon. With respect to some housekeeping, I'd love to keep this conversation as interactive as possible. And so for that, I invite everyone here to use the chat function for any comments, questions and contributions to the discussion throughout and along the way. I'll have the chat function open in front of me and I'll try and bring questions and comments from the audience into our conversation so you feel like you can be a real part of today's conversation. If you need any help, my lovely colleague Hannah is online and she is available to support with any technical issues you may have. If you need to reach Hannah in a crisis, you can email her at hannah@capire.com.au. So if something happens, you drop out or you can't get your question up on chat, reach out to her and she'll give you a hand. Today's session is being recorded. We'll share it with everyone who's registered for the event later. And my job will be to keep us on time and to facilitate the conversation. Before we wrap up with housekeeping, views and opinions made in this chat are really from the individuals, not necessarily from any of the organisations the panelists represent. So if we can take that in view, let's get into it. So let me make some introductions. I'll first actually just introduce myself a bit more. My name is Matthew Gordon. As I mentioned earlier, I'm on Wurundjeri land, but I've been born and raised between Wurundjeri and Dja Dja Wurrung in central Victoria. This is where I spend a lot of my time. I've been involved in community engagement on and off for the best part of 20 years, and I've been working with Capire for the last 5. I actually come to this conversation from a naive and perhaps ignorant point of view. I haven't had a lot of exposure to traditional owner engagement, and I hope to bring some of those silly, dumb questions to the conversation that might help everyone else on the call or anyone else on the call learn more about this space. Um, whilst born and raised here in Victoria, my background is from immigration over the last 100 years. My parents have come from England, the old land, and most recently in the 1940s, my father was a 10-pound pom. So I bring that perspective as well. But we're not here to learn about me. We're here to learn about our fantastic panel. Really, really excited to introduce you to them. Benson Saulo here is a proud descendant of the Wemba Wemba and Gujit peoples of Western Victoria and of the New Ireland province in Papua New Guinea. With more than 18 years experience across finance, economic development, international engagement, social impact. I'm not sure how you fit all this in 20 years, Benson. You mustn't sleep, but you have built a career advancing Indigenous enterprise and representing Australia on the global stage. Benson previously served as co-managing partner of First Australians Capital, a national Indigenous-led investment fund manager and advisory organisation. In 2021, he made history. Probably made history a few times, Benson, but in this instance, as Australia's first Indigenous Consul General, serving in Houston as a Senior Trade and Investment Commissioner. Benson has represented Australia through UNESCO National Commission and the Australian Youth Representative at the United Nations, and is currently Director of Capital Raising and Advisory at Eaton Capital Partners, where you're spending a lot of time chatting to folks, investors, partners, across both renewables, infrastructure, and health technology, around how we align impact investment with human rights and the UN Sustainable Development Goals. I know we can't hear our audience and see our audience, but if everyone could give a little round of applause and welcome to Benson. Great to have you here. Our next guest, panelist is Kaylee Anderson. Kaylee is a proud Aboriginal woman of Wiradjuri and Yorta Yorta Bangarang countries in New South Wales and Victoria. Kaylee is guided by the cultural values of her grandmother and ancestors, and through this she's built a 20-year career also at the intersection of cultural wisdom and strategic delivery. With experiences spanning health, social justice, architecture, urban design, and major infrastructure, Kaylee leads transformative collaborations with traditional owners that protect country, that elevate cultural knowledge, and create lasting impact for community. She's the founder of the Indigenuity Lab, an Indigenous-owned, female-owned business committed to advancing equality and self-determination and excellence in outcomes for communities around. A warm welcome to Kaylee Anderson, everyone. Great to have you here, Kaylee. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Troy, last but not least, Troy Pickwick is a proud Gureng and Mununjala man from Queensland with a distinguished career spanning government, academia, and community leadership right across Australia. He's held senior roles at both state and federal levels, including Director of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Unit and the Equity and Diversity Unit at the Australian Federal Police, with expertise across Indigenous policy, social policy, that is, education, forestry, agriculture, and cultural institutions. Troy has lectured at a master's level and led initiatives that strengthen equity and representation and an opportunity for First Nations peoples. Troy is also the founder of Good Energy Minds, which is an Australian-based Indigenous-led company providing strategic business and project management services to First Nations representative organisations and commercial enterprises, all tiers of government, non-for-profit and charitable organisations, industry and finance sectors, academia and the arts, you name it. Good Energy Minds really supports the development of leading practice within the clean energy sector and is, as an organisation, committed to building meaningful relationships between First Nations communities and proponents to create affordable and sustainable solutions that benefit all citizens. A warm welcome to Troy. Thank you all for joining us. We have you represent an awesome lineup for this conversation. I'm going to start with you, Troy. I'm going to start with you, Troy. What brings you to this particular conversation about renewables, and what can you tell us about your experience in this space?
Okay, so first off the rank. Okay, so well, look, first up, I would like to acknowledge Aboriginal and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and pay my respect to all of our mob across the nation, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. I'm a proud Garang and Manal person from Queensland. I'm actually here in Queensland. I usually reside in Sydney, and so I come to Queensland because I got family here, and I come back and say hello to family quite often, actually. So and so I'm on Quandamulka country, and so I pay my respect to all of our people. What brings me here? Well, first off, I think that there's a whole world that's changing in terms of renewables, and I believe that with GEM we can do good quality work for our people, whether they're Noongars, Yamatji, Wongais, Palawa, the whole lot, and work with proponents of renewables companies. So that's what we do in terms of GEM, and that's what brought me to this seminar to outline what we do and how we can, in some ways, do it better.
Thanks, Troy. I'm going to jump to you, Kaylee. What brings you here in today's discussion? What brings you to the topic of Indigenous leadership in the clean energy sector?
Thanks, Matt. I'm joining you from Awabakal country today, and Matt, it's Wiradjuri from Wiradjuri country in New South Wales. My grandmother would be very cross with you if she heard you pronounce that today. So
thank you for helping me.
Oh, good. Look, I got a phone call from Matt. I've also had the pleasure to be able to work with Matt on a few things in the past in relation to traditional owner engagement audits for Vickery and government departments who are currently leading some conversations with traditional owners around wind farms. So there has been a little bit of history there. The other thing that's definitely brought me to the conversation was the Self-Determination and Infrastructure Policy Report, which sits alongside the 30-year Victorian Infrastructure Strategy, which is, I feel like, my legacy in a way. It's really good to be able to go out and engage with communities and actually start to address some of those systemic barriers that are impacting on the engagement and actually, good quality outcomes. So probably a combination of those things. And I obviously have a very strong passion for self-determination, but also striving better than the status quo. I think we can do a lot better. We've got a really good opportunity for renewables to be done differently than other sectors and other things that have happened in the past. So I think that there is a real opportunities to start to open hearts and minds now, and continue to really encourage better practices and looking beyond, I think, the realm in which we currently live in, and starting to, dismantle some of the barriers to really get the good outcomes that we need, and to really properly enable enable self-determination. It needs a really strong foundation. It can't be executed, I guess, or a company implemented on something that is unstable, and so that's probably it in a nutshell. Thank you.
Thanks, Kaylee. Benson, apart from my incessant phone calls to you and our late night conversations, what brought you here to this conversation about clean energy?
Yeah, for me, it's the element around justice, and when we talk about the just transition, is really important for us to unpack and interrogate. What does this actually mean for race relations in Australia, and what does that look like from a lens that of dispossession through to self-determination, and then also that shift around ownership and collective benefit as well. And so I think this is really, it's a great conversation, a great topic for us to kind of speak to. But I think there's a tendency in this space and is to kind of look at energy transition and what the pursuit of net zero and the significant renewable infrastructure projects that will need to happen in the coming years, and where they're going to happen. To be thinking of, there's a tendency to think that this is the vehicle, and my concern is that the vehicle will be built, which is the transition or the act of construction of infrastructure, but we're still not necessarily addressing the underlying elements of justice in this, and I think it lends itself nicely into a wider conversation. But Troy, you mentioned that you're on Quandamooka country, and there's obviously Uluru Nunakul is a very well known but beautiful poet and amazing matriarch of people up there, and she wrote a poem called "The Dawn Is at Hand," and the last line in that poem, it says, "We'll be fringe dwellers no more," and I think this is, yes, energy transition is a vehicle for enabling, and Kaylee's right in the phrase that she used there, enabling self-determination. It's not giving self-determination. Self-determination is a right on everyone, but also collectively for our peoples. But that fringe dweller no more enables us to reimagine what does the future of Australia look like, and what is the rightful place of First Nations people in that. So Matthew, there's been late night conversations and deep thinking around, getting to the point of transition is important from a energy and sustainability and sovereign capability, but what is underpinning that is actually what we need to be addressing.
Well, let's jump into some more of the complexity and parts of the conversation which might be actually quite uncomfortable. I've got renewable energy is urgent, right? So we get this need to get green electrons into the grid, but the urgency cannot override the rights to self-determination, which you mentioned, Benson. I think first a definition of self-determination might be useful, and I'm just going to throw this in here, cherry picked from Kaylee's report, legacy report that you wrote for Infrastructure Victoria on self-determination in infrastructure. And this is Kaylee's words. Self-determination is a broad term that has a simple definition in theory and a range of more complex meanings in practice. In its most basic terms, self-determination describes Indigenous people's right to exercise control and authority over their lives. In other words, to be the authors of our own destinies. this right has a wide range of applications across social, economic, political, and cultural domains. And in the Australian infrastructure context, self-determination is often inextricably linked to aspirations and objectives for country, community, and culture. So that's the definition, Kaylee, you provided in that report. It sounds, as a notion, self-determination sounds very clear in principle, but in practice, this is playing out in boardrooms, in policy rooms, in community halls, sometimes on country. Where is it working? Where is it stretched or diluted or misunderstood? If self-determination means the right to shape futures, then today we want to really kind of explore how that's being interpreted, applied, and experienced in the renewable transition, not in theory but in practice. I'm going to, Kaylee, when you hear the phrase self-determination in the context of the energy transition, what does it mean to you?
Traditional owners aren't stakeholders, they're rights holders. And traditional self-determination means traditional owners are authors of our own destinies, like the definition says. I think one thing about self-determination is that it's not fixed. It does mean different things to different communities in different contexts. And it also is something that needs to be defined and redefined through, I guess, direct engagement as conditions and things change over time, as relationships change over time. Things, it means essentially that, traditional owners have the right to say no, they have the right to say yes, but it's got to look this way, and that answer needs to be respected and resourced. Like I was saying earlier, I guess in the context of energy, self-determination does require stability. And right now we've got, one party who's like, 82% renewables by 2030, and the other party is like, oh no, we're going to cap renewables at 54% and go nuclear. Those are very, two very, very different futures for country. So I think when we're asking traditional owners to exercise self-determination in energy transition, both of those things might look, very different in nature the day after the next election. So it's about resourcing and supporting traditional owners to be able to plan for both outcomes. Also, in relation to the energy context, I was finding that there was quite a lot of projects, if you look at, I guess, the IEP2 spectrum, really stuck in the inform and consult kind of phase. They didn't actually move towards the end of the spectrum where it's really focused on empowerment. And the other thing is, the whole voluntary frameworks and, political commitments, they sometimes just aren't enough. There does need to be a bipartisan sort of legislative protection for traditional owner rights that just don't evaporate when energy policy kind of reverses, pending what happens, the day after the next election. So I think, the federal First Nations Clean Energy Strategy is a great step, forward. It is a framework, I guess, for action. There's a lot of language throughout that's, investigate, consider, explore, not establish, fund, mandate. I guess I'm finding there's, just a little bit of a gap between aspiration and enforcement.
Putting words into deeds. Troy, you've been around for a while, dare I say. How have you observed self-determination kind of in the early days as an idea? And how do you compare that to now? Do you see change or progress or consistencies?
Well, this is the earlier part of when you put me and asked me, open the the seminar, caught me off guard a wee tad, but and so what I actually did write some notes down in terms of self-determination, and I'm a bit of a yes and a no. So I've got here is that I understand that self-determination was in the early 70s, and how it changed policies with Whitlam. Yet when I was a kid, I still saw my parents and their brothers and sisters, which were my aunties and uncles, battle in the everyday. And what Benson said there a minute ago with Udjuru, my mother used to look after her kids and two boys when she was playing Vigoro at Musgrave Park in Brisbane. And she's telling me this, when you sit down there and talk with the elders, and I did that all my life, and so and when I got into my 40s, they were telling me stories, even more stories, probably because I were, getting older, and so and then I used to think, well, why didn't you tell me that earlier? But sometimes they probably did, and I think that I wasn't ready. And so, in terms of yes, I had seen that we had progressed from itinerant workers, which my family did, into factory labour, and then into now white collar roles. I've done both. I've done both over 35, 40 years. So, and I thought during the 90s that it could change with having a white collar role. We still battle. And but in terms of in the world of renewables, I'm still the extreme optimist, and as I have got here, is that this industry can potentially give our people a good opportunity. At the moment, we're still working through First Nation engagement, but in the broader arena of renewables, it is still being played out. I would like to think that we could get it right before I get too old mentally and physically. And but as my late brother would say, we need to put our heads together. And in terms of GEM, we just keep working away and do good for our people, but equally for the nation. So so that's how I see self-determination on a very personal level.
So progress, but a long way to go, and renewable energy sector, perhaps a great hope or ambition for this sector in how it applies self-determination.
Yeah, that's exactly right, because this is an industry that's going to go for 2 generations minimum, and so we have to be involved. We have to be at the table, and so this is where we're currently at. We can't be just jumping up and down, putting our hands up. Everybody needs to listen to each other and work out how we can actually do it. Because First Nation people, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, have been all over Australia. Honestly, we got so much potential.
Let's jump deeper into that, and I want to do that sort of exploring, what I see as a tension, and I want to sort of test this with the panel. I see that there is a tension around getting these self-determination frameworks right, applying, principles such as free, prior, and informed consent. So that on one side of getting this transition happening, on the other side, an urgency of hooking up new energy infrastructure to run green electrons around the place. I feel there's a tension between these two objectives, and it comes down to a time basis. And I want to have a conversation now about how, if that tension's real, and how might it be reconciled. Let's look first at sort of the mechanisms for achieving self-determination. Benson, what do you see as the mechanisms and frameworks required to realise the the willing participation of First Nations that Troy's been talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually want to pick up that the element around tension, and those that you mentioned self-determination, and then principles around engagement, which is like the likes of FPIC, and then coupled with the urgency, that third piece that you mentioned, and if you think about the first two, the element around self-determination and was denied, has been historically denied. The principles around engagement, these have been established because they've been denied, and they're still not fully implemented and taken up. And yet suddenly there's an urgency to do this, and then there's this awareness that there is the lack of capacity, the lack of capability, some really structural barriers around capital as well, and yet it's on community to catch up or get left behind. And so I think this is where the tension and the underlying and picking up on my point before in regards to that just transition is that the very real reality is we'll find ourselves in the next generation, and Troy, you're right. Like, I think there is a minimum of 2 generations here in regards to the opportunity and potential. But the concern is that the urgency will ultimately determine who is actually welcome and who is actually going to benefit from this, because we do know, particularly across Northern Australia, that 40% of land there is under some form of land use agreement, whether it be native title or other, and there's still that challenge around how do we actually build in those capacity and capability to ensure that traditional owner groups are not just being spoken about as stakeholders, but then they're actually shifting into being partners, to being ultimately owners of significant assets that are going to be happening on their land. The reason why I got to pick that piece up is this is actually the greatest risk that we are facing at the moment from our communities, is that the lack of, and Kaylee summed it up beautifully around established fund mandate. In the absence of the strength of language, and when you're dealing with policy and at the UN, it is actually the strength of language that actually will determine what gets done and what is deprioritized. And established fund and mandate is not part of the vernacular, and that's not for any particular political party. That's just across policy. The element before that is in 1992, the High Court dismissed the legal myth of terra nullius, and obviously that was Eddie Mabo in the Wick case, and that dispelled the notion of the legal myth of terra nullius. However, there is great argument to be made that the belief of what terra nullius stood for, meaning no man's land or no person's land, is that there was no governance structures, there was no civility, there was no community, there was no civilization that existed prior to 1788. And then the case was made to then form that into a legal truth that this was terra nullius, which, as I mentioned, was overturned in 1992. However, that notion of the lack of capacity, the lack of comprehension, the lack of governance, unfortunately, still plays out today in regards to who's going to be left behind if this transition happens at the rate and the speed that is being requested, when there's still grappling with who are First Nations people, how do we bring them in, how do we actually bring these principles and understand self-determination in that. So I think these tensions exist because there's a party that wants to go, and then and are saying, well, hey, you mob out there, you better catch up because we're going this way, and you're going to be left behind, and we'll put all these things in place, but unless you do your part, which you've been denied from historically, then we're really sorry, but we'll see you in another 40 years, and we'll be wealthier for it. So that's where the tension lies.
I mean, let's open that up a bit. So, well, to anyone on the panel, it strikes me as traditional owner groups often need more time and resources to organise, to establish the trust, and to sort of respond to the declaration that, hey, we're going this way, we're going to build something fabulous and it's going to power the future of Australia. What does genuine kind of mobilisation support look like for a traditional owner group that's been confronted with, maybe a well-meaning but also time-poor developer? Kaylee, do you want to jump in? Sorry, you go, Troy. No, go, Troy.
No, well, I think Benson's right there. With because, and also what you also said there, Matthew. There's, I mean, our people work on the speed of trust, and so, there's not a lot of our communities don't have a lot of resources to put in to be able to negotiate with renewable companies, proponents. We're just busy on the ground, and so. And like what Benson said, well, if it's like the big train's going, and if you're not on board, well, we'll see you in another 40 years. Well, to me, that's not good enough. And why should it be? It's actually because you're going to come back in 40 years' time and saying we didn't develop that the right way we should have and could have. So, and that's Australia-wide. It's Australia-wide.
Troy, what are the learnings that you've seen from, previous trains that have gone through, whether it's the big mining train and all of the possibilities that could have offered, or the big agriculture train and, all the opportunities that could have offered? It strikes me that we've got a lot to learn, from those sectors, 40 years on or 80 years on or 100 years on, community still left behind.
That's making a sweeping, massive generalisation, but really, overall, they've left us out of it.
Yeah.
So, and this should be the case in terms of today's world, today's Australia, the future of Australia, so, I mean, there's, and again, I'll just go back to what my brother said, we need to put our heads together. Because there's so many variables in terms of, some communities don't have great internet. Some people, they sit, aunties and uncles will sit and talk to you. It's not about emails. Honestly, it's a whole reconstruction of re-strategizing and rethinking about how we actually are working.
Kaylee, do you have thoughts on what it takes for a genuine mobilisation support for traditional owners in the face of the trust piece that Troy, you mentioned, and also the kind of the time piece,
speed of trust.
The speed of trust. I love that. The speed of trust and also the speed. Thoughts there, Kaylee?
I think it comes back to traditional owners being at the table from project inception, before feasibility, before site selection, before the business case is written. It is not really about, oh, hey, we've we've scoped out this project. Here's what we're going to do. Do you consent? That's not necessarily a good, prior consent either. I think there definitely needs to be a lot of funding focused on building capacity before engagement even starts, not during, not after, but before. I think traditional owners deserve the right to get access to independent, legal and technical and financial advice sourced on, traditional owner timelines, not the project timelines. And I guess traditional owner organizations are staffed and equipped to be able to, participate as equals, not sort of scrambling to respond to someone else's schedule. So look, I think it's probably a combination of things that can support mobilization. And, it shouldn't just be coming from one particular, proponent. It should be, they should be all working together to be able to enable traditional owners in a consistent manner to be able to respond to this. At the moment, it's just, little pockets all over Australia that are working really well, and then some that are really, really behind, and some that are completely at the start. And, and then other people, or you've got, proponents or, other people who are seeking to engage with traditional owners, not having the right levels of cultural competency to be able to be sitting in the room, to be having those conversations. So there's a massive spectrum out there at the moment. There's no sort of consistency, which is, it's just a bit wild. So
Kaylee, do you, I mean, I think both Benson and Troy have, mentioned their aspirations for the clean energy sector to get this right. Do you believe that? Do you sort of see a kind of a potential shift away from more of an extractive mindset or model featured in industries past and gone by?
I think the opportunity is there, but at the moment, the structures haven't changed. I think we need to depart from the structures that have informed, I guess, the mining industry and how that's operated, and create new structures, as opposed to doing the same thing and expecting a different result. Like that's the definition of insanity. We can't keep doing that. So I think if we can get this right, the renewable energy transition, if we don't get it right, it will start to look a little bit like the mining industry did, except with solar panels. So there is opportunity. We've just got to change the structures in which it's currently operating.
This is a nice segue into the next kind of part of the discussion, which I feel like is the elephant in the room, which is about the systems, both the ethical and commercial and capital systems in which renewable developers and investors are operating in. And I want to have a conversation about ethics and the nature of power and how well the industry is performing, to its stated goals, aspirations. Benson, renewable developers, investors and their partners, they're working in a shareholder-driven system, right? Are boardrooms, executives even structurally capable of ethically navigating self-determination challenges for their projects, or are these ethics quickly traded for shareholder value?
Yeah, well, I think there's a different way. There's a number of ways that we could be looking at this, and I think a recent example of where profit over consideration, cultural understanding was Juukan Gorge. This is tens of thousands of years of cultural history and significance destroyed without governance, without conversation, without consideration, and so it kind of shows that there is, a lack of consideration of, the who's being impacted in the future. The decisions that we make today. What are the consequences that carry over in time? And actually, recently, it's been sitting with me since the Juukan Gorge decision and destruction. This notion of I've called it the futures ledger, which is a paper that I've written recently, which is around a stewardship and partnership framework, which is essentially looking at how do we justify and contextualize the decisions that we make today if it's being judged in the future. And one of the questions right at the end of there's 10 deliberative questions that I've constructed based on this notion of how can we show good governance today, regardless of the outcome of the decision, but how can we justify the decision today, or at least show the workings of how we got to a decision if it is reviewed in the future. And the last question out of the 10 deliberative questions is, what future apology is being quietly written today? And these are purposefully kind of divergent in the sense of these need to be discussed at risk committees, at boards, and deeply interrogated and allowed to sit beside Western governance frameworks and risk frameworks. But ultimately, the purpose of the Futures Ledger and this process is actually around deeply interrogating, are we actually comfortable with the decisions that we're making today if the priority here is trust, or if we actually give country and nature a seat at the table, if we actually bring future generations to the table today, are they going to be comfortable with the decisions that we're making? And it's these kind of elements that this lack of understanding of future consequence within fiduciary duties today that enables poor decisions to be made with lack of consequence into the future. And so when we think about the role of shareholders and the rise of shareholder activism, and we saw that with AGL, there is a responsibility on all of us, and we all, if we have a superannuation fund, we are shareholders in a number of these large companies and developers. It's actually up for us to actually ask the question and exercise our rights as shareholders to ensure that we are deeply interrogating our decisions today and asking that question, into what world, because ultimately this is, your superannuation is the nest egg for when you retire. But asking that question of ourselves, into what kind of world do I want to retire into? And I think that's missing at the moment around investment committees. It's missing around the conversations of boards and executives.
Thanks for sharing, Benson. I'm glad we got to talk about the Future Ledger, because I think it's a great piece, and I highly recommend reading it. I think you can. Where can people find it, Benson? Probably on LinkedIn somewhere.
Yeah, on LinkedIn. I was meant to build a website, didn't happen.
Never mind that. But that question, which I think is interesting and provocative. What future apology is being quietly drafted by the clean energy sector. I mean, Kaylee, a lot of these organisations, Rio Tinto, BHP, Octeti, examples pretty close to home, or at least within our region. There are prominent traditional owner rights failures there. There are also failures in the clean energy sector as well. Is Fossen Wind Farm in Norway breaching Sami rights through violation of reindeer herding rights. The Alto hydropower project, again in Norway, conflicted with, conflicted with the flooding and damming of traditional lands. Many of these companies and these projects are saying all the right things on their websites and in their corporate reports. Many have high-profile leaders with, deep and legitimate kind of experiences, knowledge, either as paid staff or consultants. Yet those words and deeds don't align. I don't know, Kaylee, some of this feels on one side highly performative, and on the other side, we've got cultural atrocity. What are your reflections on what the sector might be saying and then doing?
I think if you made ethics non-negotiable, I think that would change the landscape quite a lot more, even if it is an expensive venture. But look, I'm actually a big believer of getting rid of the concept social license. I think it needs to be abandoned entirely. I mentioned Telstra to you the other day because I found Telstra, the situation with Telstra, to be so fraught. And if you don't know about it, they were on one of their highest RAPs in the country. I think they were on the highest RAP that you could possibly have in the country. And, they had been tooting that horn for a very long time. It's something very, very proud of. And then they got done $140 million of unconscionable conduct because of, how they were engaging with remote mobs. So, how can you be sitting there saying, hey, look at all the amazing things we do, and here's this pretty shiny report and aspirational document that we're committed to, and this is the way that we want to go, and everyone's behind it, when in practice it looks very, very different to those words. So yeah, look, I think abandoning social license, I think it really perpetuates power imbalance, it lacks accountability, and it provides such a cover for greenwashing. I think, make accountability is something that's going to hurt. These are billion-dollar companies. A monetary slap on the wrist isn't going to teach them a lesson. Do something greater. There's something more there to hold accountability. So, yeah, look, I think, that's probably.
I'm interested in, just to pick up on a couple of themes with Benson's other deliberative question, if trust were the primary deliverable, what would this industry stop doing immediately? Would one of those things be, let's stop talking about social license?
Potentially. I think most projects would probably stop pretending that consultation equals consent. That would be pretty quickly stopped. So hopefully project objectives would then be tailored to meet local objectives for self-determination. Like that would be fabulous. Tailored for each, community group or where they're doing business. That's very aspirational. Who knows?
We see a lot from developers, government agencies leaning on the idea of continuous partnership with traditional owners, and a point you raised earlier, that this is not engagement, this is partnership, and has to be a genuine partnership, and what that kind of looks like with traditional owners. And I think this relates to a question that we've got from the audience, from Sally, who has a question around what's the best support capacity, or best way to support capacity building within communities. But what would you say, building on that, are the hallmarks of a genuine partnership with communities? So if a developer was to come in, what would you be looking for to determine how genuine that partnership with that group was?
I think in the first instance, it would be seeking permission to be on country. That's probably the first start. Let's have a conversation. Are we okay to be here? There's so much in that, being welcomed more formally to country by the traditional owners and their elders and their respected peoples is a really important way to start, and focus time on building the relationship first. Don't get in the room and be like, hey, we've got this project. If that's the first time you're meeting, that is already off to a bad start. You don't come in talking business on the first conversation. Take the time that you need to be able to really build that relationship and that rapport and that trust. Traditional owner groups should be setting the agenda. Obviously, a lot of these proponents are going to be bringing a technical consideration and technical component into that conversation, but I think traditional owners should be really steering and driving the conversation. There is mutually agreed goals, I think, is another way to be able to start establishing good partnership and working relationship and joint accountability. I think your standard trust, respect, integrity, doing what you say you're going to do. Don't do it. Everyone says it terribly, but don't do a Rio Tinto. That is a common phrase out there in the engagement world. You
don't
can't
do a
go
Rio
into
Tinto.
a Rio Tinto. Everybody knows how badly this can go, and I think if you're in there and you're engaging early and you're building relationships early, you actually reduce a lot of that risk down the track. You reduce all the potential harm that can come from it, reputation wise, financially, legally, to country, to community, to the health of people. You help to reduce that the earlier you get in and the earlier you start having a conversation. I think it, also comes back to budgets and the flexibility of timelines. If you've got a multi-billion-dollar company, you can't just be going to traditional owners and being like, here's your 150 grand to have a conversation with. That's outrageous. It should be to the scale of the project. They should be an almost equal footing to the scale of the project. That's how things should be moving forward. And, you need all of those formalities. There needs to be a formal endorsement process for traditional owners to be signing off on how things are moving forward, and to have those checkpoints and how things are moving forward. And you also need proper grievance procedures. There are so many different hallmarks, and I think if you do jump onto the self-determination infrastructure document, there is a whole list there, but those are definitely some of the key ones. And again, I think I said it earlier, it's not just consultation at bits and pieces and different points in time. It is from before, throughout, once it's done, and it continues.
Thanks, Kaylee. Troy, I mean, you meant Good Energy Mines, or GEM, only works with people it can trust, right? What do you look for? How do you know a potential developer's going to show up in a right way, in the genuine way?
Look, I think actually there's a genuine interest. I mean, what's it now? 2025, 2026. Yeah. Sorry, but going back 25 years ago, there wasn't a lot of people that wanted to negotiate, consult with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people anywhere on anything, So, and I was talking to one fellow, Aboriginal fellow in Nunga, and he was saying, "Well, Troy, it's an international movement." And so people are required to work with our mob and our people, and so it's kind of like the first stage of exposure, and so I agree with Kaylee, I agree with Benson, and on basically what you're saying, really, and what I do know, and proud and happy to hear is what you guys are saying. You guys are the next generation that are saying exactly what we were trying to say 30 years ago, but no one was listening and didn't want to listen. In fact, it was straight out combat. And so, I have worked in a lot of different organisations. I've worked at all over the country. And I believe that renewables sells itself wrong. It's all about written. There's an environmental impact statement. You fellas read it, and in a time frame that doesn't work. Our people are oral, have an oral history, have an oral culture. It can be presented much better. We're very visual. We're working blindly on these projects, and so and when you talk about the elephant in the room, talk about ethics, and there's the actual power struggles against us, and so going back to I've worked and grew up with Aboriginal people and been community focused for many years, and I remember one fellow was wanting to do a PhD orally. This is 25 years ago. And I said, how are you going to do that? He said, well, Troy, when you actually write it, he said, what I would do, and they've now passed it and said he can do it 25 years later. And but he was saying, when you actually do it, I interview people. When I interview people, you get the tone of the actual people, how they present it, how they've talked through oral culture. And we're in Queensland here. We're in Queensland, and one auntie was saying to her grandson, where are you going? And he said, oh, I'm going out this place to work, and which was in renewables. And she was thinking, oh, that's where my father used to go and fish. And so, when you've got a project and you've got all these kind of demands and timeframes and everything like that, it's not working with our people. And so when one of the questions was how can developers best support building, there needs to be the power, and I know there's the elephant in the room and the ethics and things like that, but the actual power structures needs to be more flexible in terms of working with our people in terms of timeframes, and also showing the actual projects on what they're trying to do, as opposed to just saying, there's a map on a wall, good luck. Well, no, that doesn't work. And then when people actually do go out on country, then elders are saying, well, you can't actually build there because it won't work, and which happened in one part of New South Wales, and it cost proponents millions of dollars, and again because they didn't listen. So there needs to be more constructive dialogue and to actually listen to each other, because it's there. We just need to master it, and that's going to take some time, probably.
It sounds like there's a loss in translation of knowledge going both ways. Yeah,
totally.
Benson, you're on the hunt for ethical companies that through their work will deliver human rights outcomes, meeting sustainable development goals. What are the hallmarks of a positive partnership you see in this space? What does a partnership look like?
Yeah, and I think Kaylee and Troy have really captured a large part of this, but I think the part that I'm particularly interested in, and the question was around on the developers side, is very much around the early stage capital and the willingness to accept risk as well. And unfortunately, this is often why we see a lot of capital that's kept on the sidelines, and why engagement happens a lot later. So the site's already been identified, The off-taker has already been identified. The project scope is beyond draft and ready to roll, and then communities engaged because the project itself is somewhat de-risked, which then enables developer may be doing it on balance sheet or maybe through a special purpose vehicle, but capital is not committed until there's a certain level of confidence, and that's often why First Nations groups are kind of left until later when the project is more shored up before they're invited to the table. At which point, like any project that we run in everyday life, it's harder to be flexible when there's already a momentum behind projects. And so when timeframes are predetermined before mob and community are brought to the table, unfortunately, those timeframes are the timeframes, and parties are expected to participate. So what does that ultimately mean, say, from a developer's standpoint? So yes, there has to be the consideration for what does that early stage capacity building capital look like? So a technical assistance fund attached to a project. It's early engagement with the recognition and also managing expectations that the project may not happen. But the ultimate consideration within that is what are we leaving behind? And that's from a capacity, capability, governance, skills and talent kind of perspective as well, and a developer or a investor being comfortable with that, and that's ultimately the risk, right? And so I think that's a really important element there. But I think Kaylee and Troy talked a lot about bringing in the groups early, which is absolutely part of that. Understanding their aspirations, understanding the timeframes, how community governance operates, and decision making and decision makers are really important. So prior to, I was based over in the US, as Matthew mentioned. I was an Australian Consul General and Senior Trade and Investment Commissioner. The team that I led was I was the lead for our health and life sciences for North America. So my team sat across Canada, the US, and Mexico, and that was investment attraction into Australia. And we brought $1 billion into Australia within those sectors, and then also supporting Australian companies to land in the US and expand. I was asked to join a conversation with a mining company that were looking at Mount Isa, just outside of Mount Isa, and the project was, everyone was comfortable with the project. The price tag of the level of investment was something that everyone was quite comfortable with. The two risks that presented themselves to the company, and this is something that really delayed the decision making. The conversations were around the EPA, so the Environmental Protection Act. What are the implications for this particular mining company? And then also the traditional owner engagement. And exactly what I said before, timelines were determined, the project scope was determined, and then suddenly there was this really inconvenient, and I use that word appropriately, there was suddenly this really inconvenient barrier in the way, which was the traditional owner groups. EPA's process, right? It's process and protocol. Similar in our communities, but it was also seen as, okay, now we have to deal with them. What can we give them? And it was that kind of attitude, yes, but also second or third thought around actually whose land are we going to be operating on? That was suddenly the inconvenient aspect of project, and suddenly, as Kaylee mentioned earlier, presented project risk for this particular company. And so when we think about the role of developers and how they can best support capacity, the capacity starts well before the understanding of the capacity and the capacity and capability building happens in the very, very early stages. And I think what that actually speaks to is that question that was raised at that meeting and that I was at around the Mount Isa is, well, whose land? Whose land are we operating on here? That you'd think that would be kind of the first point of conversation. Yeah.
So thanks for sharing, for all of you sharing what, the hallmarks of a good partnership looks like. Certainly Australia is not the only country confronted by these tensions, of development progress and self-determination of traditional owner groups. Are there other examples around the world of where partnership is working and working well? And when I say partnership, beyond just the payoff, here's some money to make us feel good about the land we're taking over, but genuine partnership as in, a seat at the board table, a shareholder with equity stake, in the business. Are there any examples around this happening anywhere in the world? I'll start with you, Benson, and then we'll go to Kaylee.
Yeah, so this element of equity owners and co-owners in as well as outright owners, we're seeing that largely great examples coming out of Canada, and this is the work of many decades of building structure, so governance structures that represent the many First Nations and Indigenous landowners, and then demanding a seat at the table, and then with that building capacity and capability over a long term, and really being very specific in the capabilities that they were and historically building, which is lawyers, which were accountants, which were developers, which are very practical and technical roles, knowing that the long-term intention was always to actually to own these projects and to build wealth for generations. And we are behind. Obviously, we wouldn't be having this conversation if we were on par or ahead. But we are behind there, and I think there's a lot that we can learn from that element of equity ownership and the role that plays in transition. And in fact, I probably can't share too much, but the fund that we're currently working on at the moment is actually a co-investment model, and looking at First Nations capital holders, so traditional landowners that have received royalties in the past and actually have wealth that's being currently managed, to be able to co-invest into national renewable assets, and ultimately that's not going to address the immediate challenge, which is around the developer and localized capacity and capability. But it's also it is seeking to address that intergenerational wealth management and also asset ownership piece that is currently not getting the focus that it actually needs. So we're using the Canadian models that we are seeing to be thinking about, well, what does the next generation, the next 20 years, the next 40 years actually look like from an asset management and a wealth management perspective.
Thanks, Benson, and thanks for nearly sharing that announceable. Let me know when you're ready. We'd love to learn more about that. But Kaylee, you've done a lot of research in this space about the really good examples, and what good can look like in this space. What are some of the things you're seeing, of that, that benefit of sharing equity, across traditional owner groups as well as the developer?
I think there's still, Canada's a perfect example. That was obviously going to be my answer there, particularly the Cascade power plant in Alberta. That was a consortia of First Nations groups getting together and holding quite a significant amount of equity, and then being backed by government through a loan guarantee, quite significant. We'd love to see projects like that here. And then obviously Alton hydro expansion in British Columbia. Again, full Indigenous ownership, control, intergenerational economic benefits. Like all projects on country with mob, with really big stakes, these projects aren't without their challenges. And, you know, their rights to be able to continue to operate and exercise these companies is something that they still, you know, fight and challenge every single day. They're lucky, I think, in Canada that they've got a very good legal system where they know that they can go to court if they've got an issue with other, you know, proponents or other, you know, surrounding groups or companies or just any sort of conflict. They know they can go there and it be resolved, I guess, more or less in their favor if it is a you know, something that conflicts with their treaties. So they do have that, you know, really, really strong legal backing over there, which is obviously very different to here. But I think a lot of their models are definitely something we can learn from, and I think that we can add our own flavor to be able to suit what's going to be feasible here in this current economic climate, but also in ways to be able to meet and service each traditional owner group individually at their stage that they're at that point in time, and help develop and grow and continue to sort of expand and innovate on those skill sets. And I think that there needs to be, you know, quite a bit of the working out, a tailored working out, I guess, as to what that's going to look like in practice. But a lot of amazing benefits definitely coming out of Canada, that's for sure. I think time's still going to tell. I'm still going to tell that they're also going through a lot of challenges over there at the moment in relations to, I guess, you know, their rights. So much better position, definitely something to aspire to.
Thanks, Kaylee. Thank you, everyone. We're nearly at time, so I wanted to sort of steer us towards wrapping up this conversation. To our audience, this is your last opportunity to throw in any questions or comments. But Troy, in the final question, just starting with you, you shared some of your optimism early. Is this the industry, the renewable energy sector, that's going to make history?
Well, it's got to be. That probably sums it up. It's got to be. You know, we can't continue to be marginalised. We can't continue to be having, you know, people, you know, in living in third world conditions throughout the country. You know, it's a First Nation, and then it's third nation, third world, and then it's also fourth world, where the UN states that, you know, First Nations people have no rights. So so it's got to be this industry that's and you know, I was talking to one of my friends today. We worked together many years ago, over near 30 years ago, and he was saying that, Troy, ever since I've known you, you've worked with people based on relational. It's not transactional. It's relational building, and so, you know, I believe that Jem, the co-founder, and I, we see and are working with people that are interested to make it work, and you know, that's the best I can offer in terms of how to move forward.
And like your late brother said, let's put our heads together.
Still rings in my ear every day.
Benson, is this the renewable energy sector? Is this the sector that's going to make history?
Yeah. My opinion on that is, look, it's the reason why I say that no is because what we're actually speaking here is a fundamental shift in community engagement and in governance, and so it will be one, absolutely, but parallel to this is also what you could argue is the native foods and botanicals industry as well. And unfortunately, the challenges that we're discussing here in regards to risk, capacity, capability, in that instance, it's access to international markets. It's it's hearts and minds elements as well. Like it won't be. I see the industry as the opportunity for self-determination to be expressed through. And so I'm agnostic when it comes to industries because the fundamentals have to be right. And the next wave, whatever that will be, I'm hearing a lot around data centers. The next wave is going to be data centers, and the same questions are going to be coming up around how do we actually partner with First Nations people. And so I think this is an exciting vehicle and an important opportunity for us to try and get this right. And there's there's a requirement for us to get this right. But we need to see this conversation not just aligned with a just transition, but actually we need to look at this as a reckoning without not set in like a violent kind of revolution or anything like that, but a reckoning in regards to the realization that there's something that has been off for a long time, and there's no better time than now to start addressing it and addressing it in all ways. Across industries, across sectors, across companies, across relationships with people. Yeah.
As it came up in the plenary session at the start of the Just Transition, one of the panelists there, Kate Gilchrist, preferred the term not just transition, but just transformation. Indicating that we're not about going from here to here, as in a transition, but actually from here to someplace better, perhaps, and that's probably what you're espousing with that. Kaylee, finally to you, renewable energy. Is this, are we making history?
We could, I think, if we stop expecting different results from the same systems. I also think it's more of a question as to whether this industry has the courage to build the structures that make ethics and traditional owner rights non-negotiable, even when it's, I guess, expensive and when it's inconvenient.
There you have it. Thank you, Kaylee, for sharing your insights. Now, we are right at time. I really just wanted to thank you very much to each of you, Kaylee, Benson, Troy. Thank you so much for your generosity of time and the conversations we've had in the weeks leading into this conversation. I would also like to thank our audience for sticking around for an important, uncomfortable, complex conversation. I feel like we've covered a lot of ground. I want to thank our panel for helping us cover that ground. We would love to get some feedback. So feel free, if you've got a moment, to get your devices out, scan a QR code and give us some some feedback. And also a reminder for tomorrow, coming up in the series, we have Jen McDonald from Capire leading a conversation with a panel around the role of the compatibility of agriculture and energy and how these industries can intertwine and be successful together. And tomorrow afternoon from 2 p.m, catch up with Amy Hubbard, where we start to put all of this together. and how do we start putting communities at the centre of a just transition, and pulling out all of the insights that we've shared across the series. So once again, thank you. Thank you to our lovely panel. Thank you to the supporters supporting this webinar. Hannah, Erin, thank you for sticking around. And to our lovely audience, wishing you a fabulous end of the day. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thanks
Cheers.
so much.